Hello everyone, I'm John, 8mm Mauser man, and this video is going to be a little bit different than anything else I've done before. As you can tell, the aspect ratio is a little bit different. I took the green screen down. So the reason I decided to do this video this week is because I was going to buy a gun. That didn't happen, and the big reason is it is not within my budget. So because of that, I wanted to do a video for you guys about how you can take part in the milsurping hobby on a budget. Now, what makes me qualified to talk about this? Well, the answer is pretty simple. I've been taking part in the Milsurp hobby on a budget for several years now, and because of that, I've acquired some things, and I feel like I have some level of knowledge about how to do this. Like, if you follow some people on Instagram or YouTube, you've probably seen these pictures where people have like 10 Lugers. We tend to think that you can only have that type of thing, you can only take part in this hobby if you started 20 or 30 years ago. And I'm here to tell you that although it looks a little bit different, this is still something you can do for fun. And it is still something you can have fun with while not having that big of a budget. So let's just jump right into it. This is a video where I have some notes, so I'm going to be looking down at that occasionally. And as you can tell, I have a lot in front of me. I'm going to introduce things as they come up. So the first most important thing to do is to know why you want Milsurp guns. There was a time back in the day when military surplus rifles were cheaper and better quality than plenty of hunting rifles. So people would use them just because they could get them and they couldn't get other things. And that's really not true anymore. These types of rifles that you see in front of you and this handgun you see in front of you, they're about the same price as something you'd find of similar or even better quality on the private market with guns still made. So I'm going to just talk about some categories really quick. You may be in one or more of these categories, and you may want different firearms for different reasons within that category. So the first is hunting. Some people take a lot of joy and pleasure out of hunting with old and cool guns. I mean, what I have in front of me, I have my 2447 Yugoslavian Mauser and my Ishapur 2A1. Both of these guns are in calibers that can easily take a deer, and maybe, I mean, especially with 8 Mauser, much more than that. So you may want to just hunt with these and think they're cooler than hunting with a standard hunting rifle you can buy anywhere else. You might really like the history behind it. You might think it's really cool to have a gun that's over 100 years old or a little bit less than that, or you might just like that aspect, whether it's you want to put it on a wall or anything like that. You might just think history is amazing and you want to own a piece of it. You might also collect old coins or many other things. Some people are looking for an actually practical firearm. This falls well in within that hunting category, like I said with these two, where hunting is a practical thing that you can want a gun for, and many military surplus guns are practical for those types of applications. Also right here I have a handgun, and this handgun is in, so by the way, I just want to prove to you, it is empty. I have a magazine in there, but that's not a problem. This handgun is in 9mm, and so for that reason, like, it's a practical handgun, although it has some other reasons why it's not, but we'll get there later. So you might be looking for a gun to actually use, and just think it's cooler or maybe even cheaper to use an old gun rather than a new gun. You might be looking for a gun just to put up on your wall. Now, this isn't necessarily something I do. With my collectible items, I like to use them and buy things that I can use. However, you might just be looking for something really cool to set up on your wall. Like me, this is the category that I fall into. You might be somebody who enjoys shooting guns, and specifically shooting old guns. Along with the history category, this is where I am. I like having guns in calibers that I can find and shoot, and I like to shoot quite a bit, so it's a hobby. Shooting itself is a hobby, and I enjoy shooting even when it's not historical firearms. I just think historical firearms are more fun for a number of reasons. Or simply, you could be into collecting. And typically, Ian McCollum on Forgotten Weapons actually just did a video on this. The difference between having a firearms collection and having a whole lot of guns is a theme. So right now, these are the 3 old guns that I own. I don't know if you could really say that I have much of a collection because I don't really have a theme going on. If you could say anything, you could probably say bolt-action rifles made after World War II with these two. I hope to acquire more of those just because they are kind of neat. They're cool history items, and I mean, particularly, they're pretty affordable right now, which is nice. So generally, when you're a collector, you have a specific theme, and themes can be any number of things. It can be, like I just said, guns made after World War II, or it could be handguns in 32 ACP. It can be guns used in World War I, guns from Yugoslavia, guns from Czechoslovakia, maybe American guns. If you really wanted to do something that was very cheap, you could do like single-shot shotguns. There are so many different categories. There are an infinite number of categories that you could choose. But the important thing that we're trying to figure out with this is, what do you care about? It could be things like original condition. It could be things like having it in an easy to find caliber. It could be all you care about is a specific caliber and nothing else. Maybe you want a gun specifically in .308 and a military surplus gun just happens to fit that need. Or it could be you're looking for a project or just something to do. So budget has a different meaning for different people. For some people, budget is going to mean less than $1,000. For some people, maybe you just want the gun and you don't really care if you can shoot it. Budget might be a gun that's under $200, even if the ammo is impossible to find nowadays. For me, and the topic that I'm going to use for this video, a gun that you can purchase from $300 to $500, including some ammo, or the ammo that you are going to want to use with it immediately. But don't leave if this isn't for you, because there's going to be lots of helpful advice, even if this isn't the category that you fall into. I just wanted to start by saying a general thing. Typically, and I would say in many but not all cases, when guns have ammo that is harder to find, the gun itself will be cheaper. Most people who collect guns want to shoot those guns, so when ammo is harder to find or more expensive or is likely to dry up, the cost of those guns tends to go down unless they have other historical value. For example, 8mm Mauser isn't the easiest round to find, but people love Kar 98Ks. So those are going to be ridiculously expensive. The prime example of this is the VZ52, which uses a proprietary cartridge 7.62x45. It's really hard to find, and because of that, some VZ62s can be had for like $400 to $600, even though they're really, really cool and like relatively rare rifles. So if you're looking for wall hanger type things, this is a good category to go into. I want to talk about some recommendations of mine, some personal recommendations that you can talk about, and that's where we'll get into some of these types of things. First, there are guns that are very hard to find ammo for, but are cool as history pieces. And when I say very hard, I guess I mean it's possible to find ammo for these guns. However, it's usually more expensive. You need to buy modern production ammo, and that modern production ammo is upwards of $1 a round or something like that. It's difficult to go plinking with this ammo. However, for people who like hunting with it specifically, or are going to just put it on a wall or in a safe, these can be great ideas. So the first up is Carcanos. Carcanos are in 6.5, and older Carcanos, I believe, are in another round. I can't remember. They're Italian rifles. They're really cool history pieces. They were used in both World Wars, and they have a different action than many guns that we might be familiar with if you're familiar with Mausers. However, because they have that harder to find ammo, they're cheap. Sometimes as low as $200 or $300 for a rifle in pretty decent condition. Anything that is French. Now, this has kind of changed. So you used to be able to find Berthier rifles for around about $150 to $200. And again, that's because 8mm Lebel is difficult to find and can be expensive. So people tend to flock to that gun if you're just looking for something cheap. They're really neat guns historically. They were used all the way back in World War I. And also, a lot of battle rifles, when we use the term battle rifle, that means a rifle in a full-sized caliber but semi-automatic, usually, typically. A lot of French battle rifles are also cheaper than other battle rifles because that ammo is harder to find. Now, they're still more expensive. They're outside of our realm today, but still important. Black powder cartridges. Guns taking black powder cartridges. At the gun show near me, several gun shows in a row, there has been a Italian Vetterli for sale for, I think, $225. So the Italian Vetterli has very expensive ammo. I mean, like, if you get production stuff, it can be as much as like $30 per round. Just because it's not the kind of gun people still shoot today. Now, that being said, if you want to just buy a gun and put it up on your wall, put it in a case, anything like that, they're really cool looking rifles. Arisakas. Arisakas are in the same category as Carcanos. They're Japanese rifles. I passed up an Arisaka that was $125 only about a year ago. Just recently, those have been rising in price, I think, as people have realized that these are really neat rifles and are really underappreciated. And you can, like, if you have a Cabela's near you, you can still find ammo for these at that Cabela's. It's just, it's going to be more expensive than something like 8mm Mauser will be or 7.62 will be. It can be as much as $1 a round, if not more than that. Also, old revolvers and guns in one-off calibers. When I say old revolvers, I mean like H&R, pretty cheap revolvers back in the day. But again, if you're looking for something in a display case, if it's not shootable, that might be okay. When I say one-off calibers, I mean things like that 7.62 by 45, and none others really come to mind right now. But guns like that, where you can't just go into a Cabela's and find ammo for it, that kind of stuff will be had fairly cheaply. And you might be able to find ammo for it sometimes if you do care about shooting, just not very much. Next, I want to talk about if you care only about history and age, but not necessarily original quality, handling, manufacturing. And the first thing in that is there are a lot of sporterized guns that are really cool history pieces that maybe have interesting history even being sporterized. However, because they're sporterized, collectors like me don't really want them. So I'm going to grab my Mauser for a second. What sporterization generally means, if you've never heard that term, is that they'll usually cut the stock off somewhere around here. They'll take the handguard off. They might even take the front sights off and cut down the barrel. However, they will drill holes and mount a scope on the receiver. For people like me who care about the historicity of a gun and want original condition, that kind of ruins it. And thankfully, that is not a common practice anymore. But earlier in this video, I mentioned that a lot of these military guns at one point were cheaper than modern production guns, and the ammo was just as plentiful, so it wasn't an issue. Because of that, people who wanted a hunting gun would go and get this high-quality, military rifle and turn it into what they wanted from it. It would be a project gun, and some people really enjoyed that back in the day. Now I think this is not a thing we should be doing because we do have the opportunity to get things like these, and modern hunting guns are not that much more expensive. However, because of that, it has a cool history. You can still might be able to see the crest and things like that, but the gun itself has been modified, and to a lot of people that ruins that original value. That might not to you. Another thing in this category is guns that have changed hands. And when I say that, I mean particularly among militaries or nations. One of the first examples that comes to mind, and although we're kind of out of this phase now with the $500 mark. However, some Kar 98Ks were captured by Yugoslavia, Russia, maybe a few other countries. Czechoslovakia is one of those. And they were mix-matched. They might have had the Nazi marking scrubbed off. However, other than that, they appear just like Kar 98Ks. Sometimes guns that have had those modifications can have a really neat history behind them, and that history oftentimes is much cooler than the original gun, and it's at like half or a third of the price. So guns that have swapped hands from different nations can often be cheaper and have more history involved. Ian at Forgotten Weapons has been doing a lot of videos recently with guns that have come out of Ethiopia, and those guns that have come out of Ethiopia might be guns that Italy captured from Germany in World War I, and then they modified, and then they gave to Ethiopia and Ethiopia modified. And although they're not in the best condition, they've swapped hands 2 or 3 times and have had a lot of history going into them. They're really cool history pieces, but not highly valued by all sorts of different collectors. Turkish guns, because Turkey had a whole lot of Mausers and also Gewehr 88s and also a few Lee Enfields that they had left over from World War I. And in the 40s, they changed all of these guns to be the same pattern. They changed them all into the same caliber. And these guns can be had fairly cheaply. So you can get what was an original Gewehr 1888 that has been modified by Turkey and then was then being sold in the US surplus market. And those can be had pretty cheaply, and they have a lot of history behind them. You want to be careful with those guns with certain ammos, however, with certain 8mm rounds. That's a conversation for another day. Also, something that might be valuable to you is guns that are broken, deactivated, or unusable. Broken guns, they might be called gunsmithing specials on certain websites. Those can be pretty neat rifles. However, they're not shootable, so collectors like me aren't as interested in them. Of course, if I see one at a really great price, I might still pick it up. Deactivated guns, this is much more common in Europe than in the US, but it still happens. Deactivated guns are where a rifle might have been, maybe it was a machine gun before, maybe it was just one of these guns that somebody didn't actually want anymore. So what has oftentimes happened is they drilled through either the receiver or the barrel and they filled it in. I've seen videos where they've cut an angle in the bolt face. Any number of those types of things, and that's to deactivate the guns that it can't be used. Those things can be had pretty cheaply. And if you're just looking for it for the history piece, that kind of stuff can still be really cool. And then the other part of that is unusable guns. Now, the only example of this that I have ever seen in person was at a gun show several years ago where somebody had a Lee Enfield, I think it was an SMLE in fact, that had been made in Pakistan and gone through the Khyber Pass. And it was a really neat rifle. It was probably for sale for about $200. Normally, SMLEs are, $400 plus. However, this gun was $200. It would have been a really cool history piece. It would have been cool if you just like the mechanics and those types of things, although you couldn't shoot it if that's what you're interested in. Next, I want to talk about guns that you won't shoot much, so high prices are okay. And I already kind of mentioned this. This one is for hunters. I already mentioned Arisakas. Lee Enfields are an example in this category. You can find 303 British hunting loads, and although 303 British nowadays is more expensive, if you're just planning on shooting a few times a year, maybe making sure your sights are zeroed for the ammo you have, and then taking it out and shooting a deer, that can be a great option for you. I personally, I don't hunt. I shoot to collect. I shoot for enjoyment. So because of that, I don't really care about that type of thing. So guns like that, even though the gun itself might be more expensive, since the ammo is cheaper, that's a good thing to consider. Another thing like this, and sometimes these can be as cheap as $200 to $300, is guns in 7.65 Argentine or 7.65 Mauser and 7mm Mauser. Both of those ammos themselves are more expensive. The guns can sometimes be more expensive. However, if you're not planning on shooting often, that likely won't matter since you're not buying as much ammo, so the gun can be a little bit more expensive in that sense for you. Next, I want to talk about the thing that I'm passionate about, and that is shooters and hobbyists who really care a lot about original condition. That's where these are going to come up. You might call them like LARPers or cosplayers, people who want to Mad Men at their Lee Enfield bolt, all that kind of stuff. And the first thing is certain Mausers in 8mm. And so I'm going to list a few different countries where you can find these. Yugoslavia, Turkey, Spain, Czechoslovakia, China, several others. This is a Yugoslavian Mauser, an 8mm Mauser. No rounds in there. And this rifle, I traded for a gun that I didn't want and traded for 200 rounds of good 8mm ammo. If you don't know what good 8mm ammo is, I have a series going on that right now, so I'll be sure to leave a card with that. But 200 plus rounds of good 8mm ammo, and then several stripper clips. And he traded it to me for a rifle that I really didn't want anymore. I've sold some guns that I regretted. I did not regret that trade at all. It was a Mossberg MVP, and I wasn't a huge fan. I think he had it listed, though, for around $400. That is a budget Milsurp rifle. And 8mm, although 8mm that is modern production like PPU, Herters, that kind of stuff, S&B, all of those can be a little bit more expensive. However, there is still some quality surplus 8mm that sells for 50 cents a round, even 30 cents a round sometimes. So guns in 8mm can be a very good option for you. So Yugoslavian Mausers, along with other Mausers in 8mm, can be a great option for that because 8mm ammo is still available. Next, let's talk about Mosin Nagants. I don't have a Mosin Nagant, and that's a gun that I do regret selling for actually this handgun, and I liked that rifle quite a bit. Mosin Nagants can often be had anywhere from $200 to $300 from like big box retailers. They'll often be maybe $400. But anyway, you'll often see standard Mosin Nagants from either the $200 to $400 range. When I say standard, I mean not Finnish Mosins. Those are much more expensive. But I mean Russian Mosin Nagants, either 9130s or M44s, Chinese Mosin Nagants, Romanian Mosin Nagants, maybe some of those other countries. And also, 7.62 by 54R is a fairly easy round to find. You can often find spam cans for under or around $200. So imagine that. You can get a rifle and a spam can with 440 rounds for $400 to $500. That is a pretty great option if you want to get into military surplus and you want to shoot, however, you don't have a big budget. That's within most of our budgets, or at least we can get there with some savings. One more thing on Mosin Nagants that I forgot to bring up. Walmart, of course, has been restricting the ammos that they are selling. However, a Walmart that I used to be around sold 7.62 by 54R for $12 for a box of 20. So even buying new production ammo is about 60 cents a round, which is really not bad compared to some of the other rounds that we've talked about today. Another option is SKSs. So let's talk about the SKS. The SKS is in 7.62 by 39. And even during the pandemic, I was able to find 7.62 by 39 for $10 for a box of 20. Before the pandemic, you could often find $5 for a box of 20 rounds of 7.62 by 39. That is a pretty reasonable price, especially considering that SKSs can get as much as $400 and Russian ones are now about $800. But Norinco SKSs, especially Type 54s, which are the Chinese SKSs made for the military, And other SKSs from different countries can often be $400, $500, maybe even a little less than that depending on their condition. Condition is a lot of this. If you're looking for a rifle that makes you want to feel like you're in World War I or World War II, or even like Vietnam or whatever, you're just into the shooting condition, getting a gun that's in bad condition might not really matter to you. Like that Mauser Nagano I was talking about earlier was in terrible condition. However, it was in bad condition. I didn't care about that because it shot well and it was a fun rifle. Next, I want to talk about the option that I went with this Ishapur 2A1. Again, nothing in the magazine, nothing in the chamber. So it is a safe rifle. This rifle is a Ishapur 2A1. It's a Lee Enfield in 7.62 by 51, or what you might more commonly know as 308. If you disagree with me on that, I have a video for that as well. I shoot safely with 308. So a really big advantage of these was that I saw a movie that was taking place in World War I from a British perspective, and I saw a few different features of this particular rifle that I thought were really neat. The nice thing about this rifle is twofold. First of all, a original Lee Enfield is probably going to be 500 plus in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases. And this rifle is in fairly decent condition and cost me around 400. You can find them much cheaper though. The other bonus is that you can find 308 and 7.62 everywhere. I mean, Walmart, I have a Murdoch's Ranch Supply in town. Basically, if a store sells ammo, they're going to have one kind of 308 or another. Other examples of guns that have been rechambered into 7.62 are 1916 Spanish Mausers and many others that are in this caliber. Now let's talk briefly about handguns in the same category. I would say that the 4 calibers to watch out for in this category are 32 ACP, 380 ACP, 9mm, and Tokarevs. Tokarevs in 7.62 by 25 Tokarev. You can find military surplus 32 ACP pistols anywhere from like $200 to, if it's maybe a German one from World War II, far exceeding our value today. But you can find some really cool in around the $200 range. A lot of these are police pistols from Europe, because Europe used 32 ACP in police pistols all the way through the Cold War, and probably some even till today. The next round is 380. Honestly, there's not much to say here. It's the same as 32 in this specific aspect, although it's a different round, of course. Next, I want to talk about 9mm. You probably saw my Tokarev earlier and did not think that it was in 9mm, and it in fact is. It is a Norinco 213, which means that it is a Chinese copy of a Tokarev in 9mm, Parabellum 9mm Luger 9x19. Now, you want to watch out with 9mm because there's also 9mm Largo, which I believe is 9x21. So what I'm saying here is, just because a gun says 9mm on it does not mean that it's the same 9mm that you think it is. Another example of this is that 380 can be in 9mm Kurtz. It's what they called it in some places in Europe. Another example, yet again, is 9mm Makarov, which is 9x18. And in some of these cases, a gun can chamber a cartridge that it wasn't designed for, even fire that cartridge, and damage your gun. So, know what 9mm your gun is, and you can figure this out by doing research. Obviously, I can't go through every single example. So this is one clear example. It's in 9mm, standard 9mm that we're familiar with. And it is a copy of a Tokarev, which means that I can feel like I'm shooting a Tokarev when I'm using it, but I can find ammo everywhere. Other examples of guns in 9mm are certain Spanish Star pistols. You can find also Zastava, which means Yugoslavian. Zastava is the factory. Pistols in 9mm, that are also Tokarevs. You can also, if this interests you, you can find police trade-in pistols that are in either 9mm or 40 Smith & Wesson. You can find, if you want something United States military surplus, the Beretta M9, those are relatively plentiful. You can find those places. And many, many others. Those are just the quickest that come to mind. Finally, let's talk just a little bit about Tokarevs. Tokarevs can generally be had anywhere from $200 to $300, maybe $350 if it's in really good condition. And in this case, that doesn't just mean Romanian, Yugoslavian Tokarevs. This can be original Russian Tokarevs that were used in World War II. So they have a really cool history behind them. And they can be had for less than $400. Also, spam cams in 7.62 by 25 Tokarev are still available, and they will come with 1,440 rounds, I believe. So you get a lot of ammo and a lot of gun for a relatively fair price, which is really cool. And I guess we should also talk a little bit about 9mm Makarov or 9x18, because Makarovs can also be had anywhere from $200 to $400. Again, even Russian Makarovs for that price. And 9x18 is not that expensive if you can find it. It's probably roughly in the same pricing category as 32 ACP. Maybe $20 for a box of 50. Again, a lot of this depends on your location. I've searched several gun stores in my area, and I can only find one that carries 32 ACP. A lot of this depends specifically on your area, or if you're willing to ship, the prices you can get it shipped to you for. Let's talk a little bit about where to look for this type of ammo. And the first is local gun stores, pawn shops, and those types of things. I don't think I've ever bought a gun from a pawn store or pawn shop, or just a regular gun store. It's not that I don't care about those things. I frequent one actually regularly, seeing if they have anything in my style, and I actually was very close to buying a gun from one. Guns at these places can be really cheap. You can also find guns like these in these places, and it might come to your advantage that most people that go to that pawn store might not care about it. So because of that, you might get a pretty good price for a gun that is really cool. The next option I want to talk about is gun shows. I have bought guns at gun shows before. Now, I talked already about my Tokarev. This one I traded for that Mauser at the gun show, and I also bought that Mauser at the gun show. I bought both of them at gun shows, and I haven't had a bad experience buying a gun at a gun show. That's not to say that I haven't had bad experiences at a gun show, just that I've never had bad experiences buying a gun at the gun show. They can be pretty great, although some things can be overpriced. However, you aren't really out anything going to one except maybe the $10 admissions fee, and even if you don't buy anything, you might still find some ammo you want, and you might still get to see a cool gun in person that you haven't gotten to see before. However, you can find some really great guns at gun shows for relatively decent prices. Next, let's talk a little bit about the website Arms List. Now, this only applies if you're in America. Arms List is a website used to list guns for sale and list guns for buying. Like I said, I found both of these guns on Arms List. You could associate it most closely with something like Craigslist. And just like how there are lots of scams and lots of dangers associated with Craigslist, there are lots of dangers and lots of scams associated with Arms List. However, if you're smart, you can still use the service well. I'm going to recommend that you subscribe. I'm going to be doing a video down the road that's going to be about how to use Arms List safely without giving into any scams. Next is Gunbroker. If Arms List is akin to Craigslist, Gunbroker is akin to eBay. It's just an auctioning service. It's a website. They do have some strange rules with their auctions, but you can figure that out. It can be a really cool service, and you can find some really good deals. Usually because it's an auction, it's much more likely to go for its market value rather than a place like Arms List, where it's just somebody listing it. However, because it's going market value, you likely won't overpay unless you want to. Gunbroker can also be a way to find a gun's value. When I do the Gunbroker video in the future, that will also be something I talk about there. Another aspect of this is import sites. Import sites are companies or organizations that import guns into the US directly or through one person, and that way there's less of a middleman, and they just have a lot of these types of things available. Some that quickly come to mind are Edelweiss Arms, Royal Tiger Imports, Classic Firearms, although they can be a little bit shady. Lots of people have done videos on that, and I've personally never bought anything from Classic. And lots of others, like DK Firearms, JG Sales. Ultimately, what you can do is Google military surplus rifles for sale, or military surplus guns for sale, and just start clicking links. You'll find stuff that's good. Many of them are credible. I haven't found any that seemed uncredible yet. Also, though, I've never bought guns this way. I'd like to conclude by talking about 2 or 3 more ideas. An advantage or a thing you can do is you can get guns that have the same ammo. So that rather than collecting 10 or 30 or 40 different ammo types, you just have 1 or 2. Also, I would like to push my guns aside for a second to talk about something else. Alright, so let's talk about all these things for a second. You might be in a situation where you simply can't collect guns. And there are plenty of reasons for that. Maybe you live in a country that doesn't allow firearms. Maybe you live in a state that doesn't allow firearms if you're in the US. You might be in a situation where your parents don't want you to own guns and you're in high school. I've talked to a few people like that, and my parents were always cool with guns. My dad owns guns. But there are lots of people whose parents either don't want them to collect military surplus guns because they think they're trash, or they don't want them to collect guns at all. Or maybe you're just in a place where financially you can't afford to spend even $200 or $300 on a gun. Here's what I want to say to you. there are plenty of military surplus things that are really neat and really cool that you can still collect. So I brought some of mine out here that I've just kind of accumulated over the years. These things are often cheaper than collecting guns, although not always. There are some possibilities of things being outside of that. And if you plan on collecting guns in the future, but you can't right now, these things can just aid you in that process so that in the future you already have something. So let's talk a little bit about what I have. First, I have some bayonets. This is a M16 bayonet from Vietnam. It's called the M7 bayonet. A friend found this and gave it to me. And bayonets are really neat, and it's like just a really cool knife. And this is a Romanian AK-47 bayonet. This is like one of the first knives that kind of got me into military surplus stuff. It's a really cool knife. I think I paid about $7 for it, but that was 10 plus years ago. Even today, they're less than 20. So it's a really cool thing to collect, and has a lot of history. So if you're into the history of guns, and you can use it. You can use it as wire cutters. You can use it for, a hunting knife or whatever else you want to use it for. Maybe you want to collect various ammos. There are entire books on ammunition collecting. So I just brought a few out that I have right now. This is all 8mm ammo and original to different countries. I have Bulgarian, Ethiopian, Romanian, Yugoslavian, Chinese, Canadian even. Lots of different 8mm rounds that I've been doing videos on. However, even just collecting these is kind of a fun hobby. There are so many to deal with, and it can be a fun way to begin military surplus collecting for a much lower amount. I've been buying at least 50 rounds of each to do my testing, and I've probably spent under $300 on ammo, and probably much under that, and I already have probably 10 different ammos. If you're only buying 1 or 2 rounds of each one, you can do it for far less than that. Another cool thing is various pouches. This is a World War I United States ammo pouch I found in the Goodwill of all places. I use this in videos sometimes just because it fits stripper clips really well. And these particularly are a little bit more expensive, but even then they're not, you can find them as low as $50. This is an Israeli grenade pouch. I found it on a flea market for $5. So it has some Hebrew on it. Again, the cool thing about this kind of stuff is you can use it in day-to-day life with normal things. You can use it to just hold things in a backpack or whatever. And then this is the pouch that came with my stripper clips for my Lee Enfield. It's just an M14 repack kit. My point in saying all of this stuff is you can get into military surplus even if you don't have the money for guns right now. You can get into military surplus even if your parents don't want you collecting guns right now, or even if you're in a state where you can't collect guns right now. This stuff is a really cool way to collect on a much tighter budget, especially like the pouches and things. There's just no restriction on those. So anyway, I think that is everything I have to say today. Did you think I missed anything? If you did, leave a comment below and subscribe, because I'm going to be doing more content on these types of things later. They hopefully won't all be this long. I know this is kind of a long video, and if you stayed through the entire thing, thank you so much. All right, bye everyone.